Sometimes to appreciate the scope and greatness and intensity of a disaster, of a tragedy, it makes sense not to look at the grand scope of things, but rather to zoom in with a microscope, to look at one particular instance of tragedy, and by understanding that one small instance, we can appreciate the larger situation as well. One of the most powerful keynote that we read today on Tisha B'Av is Kina in the Ashkenazi keynote. It's Kina Chav Gimel 23. It's based on a story that shows up in the Gemara in Gittin. And it's about two people. And if you had to choose the most horrifying story possible, it's not amongst the most horrifying stories in the literature of destruction that unfortunately we as a Jewish people have developed. But nonetheless, if you want to capture and encapsulate in one short story what Galut is about, what it means for Am Yisrael to be destroyed, I believe this story captures it more powerfully than almost any other. And because of that, it might give us the rays of hope to understand perhaps how we can begin moving from this day on in the direction of Geula. So the story comes from the Gemara in Gittin, Nun Chet Amud Aleph. It's a story of two children, a boy and a girl, their brother and sister. They're the children of Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha Kohen Gadol. As the Romans ransacked Eretz Yisrael, they captured countless Jews, those they hadn't slaughtered, and they sold them into slavery. And it turns out that the son of Rabbi Yishmael was sold to one master, and the daughter was sold to another master. And they were made into slaves. And they were downtrodden, and they were starved and beaten and given degrading labor. And one day, these two Roman taskmasters are dining, they're reclining in their banquet, and they're schmoozing with each other about their parnassas, about the stock market, and they start talking about their slaves. And one of the masters says, by the way, amongst all the slaves that I captured, I have this one gorgeous, gorgeous girl. She's amazing. She's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. Hard to believe she's even Jewish. And the guy, man, he's schmoozing with says, well, it's funny. I have an incredibly handsome, well-built, strong, intelligent slave from amongst the Jews that I captured. And there's a twinkle in their eye. There's that moment when they both realize what the other person's thinking, and they say, well, why not make more of them? They're property, why not mate them? So they decide, okay, that's what we're going to do. We're going to bring this gorgeous girl and this handsome young man together, and they'll make lots and lots of slaves for us. And comes that night, they put this boy and this girl together in a dark prison room, and they're locked there. And the Roman masters are chuckling, they think they know what's going to happen. And there they are, this boy and this girl, and they realize that if their reality hasn't become degrading enough, they're now facing the ultimate kind of degradation, being mated like animals to another slave. And Rabbi Yishmael's son sits in one corner and begins to weep, and he asks himself, how can I, the son of Rabbi Yishmael, Kohen Gadol, how can I be mated like an animal to a slave? A slave girl. She's not a girl with yichus. She's not a girl who's a bas talmid chacham, a tzadekes. She's a slave. And the daughter of Rabbi Yishmael is sitting in her corner and she's weeping, and she's asking herself the same thing. I'm a bas Cohen. How can I be mated with a slave? And they lie there in their corners, not coming anywhere near the other, all night long, crying about their bitter fate. And then dawn comes, and the sun begins to rise, and the light begins to filter through the window, and they can see the other person in the corner. And it takes a few moments before they realize, that's my sister, that's my brother. And in agony and delight, when they realize who they've been imprisoned with, they rush to each other and embrace each other. And crying, both of them die of broken hearts. The magnitude of their suffering and their degradation. It's a sad story, but I want to point out that in many ways this story is a metaphor for Galut as a whole. Because what was happening that night? What was happening when the son and the daughter of Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol were locked in the prison cell together? These were two people who were deeply connected, who loved each other, who were both tzaddikim, were both on the highest levels of spirituality. And yet because of the darkness, they saw the other person as scum, as dirt, as something far beneath them. And because of that, the only option was to separate themselves as much as possible. They each had to find their own corner and cry alone, and cry separately at the horror of having to be locked in the same room as the other person. And it was only when the light began to filter through the window, I began to realize, the person I'm locked up with is my brother, is my sister, is also a tzaddik. That's when they could come together. And amongst all the great horrors of Galut, amongst them is the horrible pain of realizing we've lost that ability to see. We've lost the ability to look at another Jew and realize they're different from me, and yet they're great. They're different from me, but they're tzaddikim in their own way. I can see their greatness, I can see their particular brilliance. I can love them, even though they're different from me. In the darkness of Galut, our response to so many of our fellow Jews is to want to have nothing to do with them, to want to go to our own corner, and to cry about the bitter fate that we're stuck with people that are so low. I know that I'm high. I know that I'm a tzaddik. I know that I'm a Ben Kohen Gadol. But I'm stuck with these people. That's Galut. Galut is when we can't see the greatness of those Jews that we're, so to speak, stuck with in the covenant of Am Yisrael. And Geula comes when the light comes. Geula comes, we can look across that prison cell and see that person in the corner crying and realize, that's my brother, that's my sister, that's a Ben Kohen Gadol, that's a tzaddik. Which we zoche from today and on to begin to see the light gradually. Let the dawn begin to filter through our prison windows. Let us gradually begin to see the faces of our brothers, the faces of our sisters in Am Yisrael, and realize, Amech Kulam Kedoshim, realize that every single Jew that we're bound with is a Ben Gedolim, a Bat Gedolim, and to see the greatness and the beauty in every single Jew.
Bein HaMitzraim,